Well, good morning. It's time for us to begin our class, and we have a lot of families out of town this morning, even from my family, and so we want to remember them in our prayers. But we hope that we'll be fine this morning. I'm sure we will be. We're going to begin our class with a prayer. And Brother Miller, would you mind leading us in the prayer? You can do it right from there if you'd like. Amen. Let's see, did anybody pick up the microphone this morning? Would you like to read? We could probably reach to you. Probably could. Okay, we are in week number 42 of our Life of Christ series, and our scriptures are going to be from Matthew chapter 9, verses 18 through 26. Parallel accounts are found in Mark 5, verses 21 through 43. Actually, that's the passage that we're going to be reading, and we will be referring to other passages as well as Luke 8, chapter 8, verses 40 through 56, and then finally Matthew 9, verses 27 through 34. Now they'll be today, of course, Wednesday evening as well. But I would ask you to open your Bibles to Mark chapter 5. Again, we're going to be reading verses 21 through, 20 through 43 actually. 21 through 43 is what we want to do in this text. Now, this has to do with the healing of Jairus' daughter, and we also, in the middle of that, we will come across a woman that is described as having an issue of blood. And it'll take this morning and Wednesday night to get through both of these in our study. Truly, this is a remarkable study as we look at the text. And so I'm going to ask us to go ahead and read from Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. This will serve as our key text, and then we'll be referring to the other parallel accounts as we go along.
Now when Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus, is that right? Jairus? Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live." So Jesus went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him. Now a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years, and had suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, "If only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well." Immediately, the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt it in her body that she was healed of the affliction. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to him, "You see the multitude thronging you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see her who had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing that what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." While he was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not be afraid, only believe." And he permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Then he came into the house of the ruler of the synagogue and saw the tumult and those who wept and wailed loudly. When he came in, he said to them, "Why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they ridiculed him. But when he had put them all outside, he took the father and the mother of the child and those who were with him, and entered where the child was lying. Then he took the child by the hand and said to her, can you help me?
Talitha Kumi.
Talitha Kumi, which is translated, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." Immediately the girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years of age. And they were overcome with great amazement. But he commanded them strictly that no one should know it, and said that something should be given to her to eat.
Okay, thank you. It's quite a reading. But again, we're going to be considering this both today and on Wednesday evening. Luke chapter 8 and verse 40, a parallel account to this, records that Jesus returned. That is, he had sailed back from the east side of the Sea of Galilee back to his hometown of Capernaum. Remember, he has made this city his headquarters during his public ministry. And the text there tells us that the multitude welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. Can you imagine that? They would have had no idea when he'd be coming back, but they were willing there to wait. The word here means the multitude was expecting, anticipating with eagerness Jesus' return. Now, I want to remind us once again that Matthew's account is not in chronological order, at least not as much as Mark's and Luke's. They're more in chronological order. So when you're looking at the parallel or the harmony of the Gospels, it's easy to get confused because Matthew has his accounts of the same event in different orders. And of course, we've talked about that before. Each gospel writer has his particular reason for writing. And so he's going to put the events together, not necessarily chronologically, and he certainly doesn't mention all the events, but those that point to the purpose for which he's writing. And each of the gospel accounts have their own purpose. And so what we're reading here is that Jesus returns back to the mob that he had escaped the night before. And that takes us back to our reading from Luke chapter 8, verses 36 through 39, as well as Mark chapter 5, verses 16 through 20. Remember, Sister Bergstrom read to us beginning with verse 21 of Mark's gospel. So this is more in chronological order. And our reading in Mark 5:21 states that a great multitude gathered to him. This is going to be important because it almost seems as though all through this reading, Jesus is being jostled around, bumping around. Sometimes people will run into us because maybe they lose their balance, But can you imagine thousands of people crowding Jesus, and he's probably being bounced around from side to side? You can understand why he needed to get away from the mobs. That's one of the reasons why he got in the boat to begin with, right? So now he's coming back to face the mob. By the way, scholars understand this particular place right here marks the beginning of the second year of Jesus' public ministry. And it's called the Second Galilean Tour. And at this particular time, Jesus is at the top of his popularity. We know that the tide of public opinion is going to change, but right now he's at the very height of popularity. So we are introduced to a man. His name is Jairus. He is the father of an ailing girl. The text is telling us that she's nearing death. And Jairus is described as being ruler of the synagogue in verse 22. Literally, it's saying that he was over the synagogue. Sometimes these individuals were considered synagogue elders, but they were still below the hierarchy of the scribes and maybe even the Pharisees. And they had their attendants as well. Now, being in charge of the synagogue or being over the synagogue meant that he was responsible for the services. Typically, he'd be doing, I guess, what Steve does for our worship services. Make sure everybody is aligned, what's going to be happening, including maintaining order, inviting men to speak and to read. It appears that Jairus was maintaining order, inviting men to do that. And it appears that he is one of the members of the board of elders. There would be more than just one who governed the synagogue in Capernaum. And so we see here that these elders were not necessarily old men. We see that on several different occasions. Another ruler, remember you read of the rich young ruler in Luke chapter 18 and verse 18. Ruler, we're not told he was a ruler over any synagogue, but it'd be the same word that would be used in regard to functioning as an elder. And so in this particular case, this man has a young child, has a daughter that is 12 years old. Well, yes, she's almost a marital. That seems strange that a girl get married at 12. But yeah, Steve's right. In that culture, because even boys were considered men at 12, you see. So anyway, Jairus fell at Jesus' feet. And Matthew 9:18 gives us an additional note. Not only did he fall at Jesus' feet, he worshiped him. And so we look at that and we say how wonderful that is. But just think about the risk this man is taking. Being over the synagogue there in Capernaum. Here we have a man who's considered an elder, and he is humbling himself before Jesus, which tells us right here he perceived that his trouble to be greater than his pride. Yes. There's a lot to be admired about this man. And we can't help but be moved by this man's agony. Just think about yourself being in his position, and you have a daughter that is deathly ill. Would you want to leave your daughter to find somebody else? This must have been heartbreaking even for him to leave his daughter.
After he found out that person could be his daughter, or if I find somebody that can heal my son, yeah, sometimes, yes, you have to do that.
But would you want to leave your loved one? I don't think so. But it was a choice he made, wasn't it?
It also shows his desperation, too.
Yes, it also shows his desperation. This is a very desperate man. In Mark 5:23 it reads, "My daughter lies at the point of death." And I got to reading about that. I mean, Jesus has to go to his house, or he's going to go to his house to heal her. Do you suppose he even at that time knew the status of his daughter?
Yes, yeah, he did. Jesus, yeah, I think so.
Could she had died on his trip there?
Yeah, she did. She did. According to Scripture.
See? So he didn't know until somebody came and told him. And so he was gone when his daughter died.
Oh, you mean Jairus? Yeah.
Yes, Jairus is the girl's father. And so actually when he says this to Jesus, as far as he knows, she may already be dead. And of course, word comes that she is. It is Luke the physician who immediately supplies all the details, more so than the other gospel accounts. Look at verse 42 here in Mark chapter 5. It says, "For he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying." Then notice this desperate father and what he says in verse 23, "Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live." Well, as you're about to see, the miracle is going to be greater than he even imagined. Okay? And so what we're seeing here is an incredible statement of faith. How is he? I want you to just look at the text and tell me, what do you see to be his perception of the situation with Jesus? What does he see? Pardon?
Jesus had the power to grant his request.
Well, but how's he seeing it?
That he's dealing with God.
He's seeing his daughter well, isn't he? He's seeing through this. So it reminds me when I was talking to a basketball player. I never was very good at playing basketball. But making a basket, what's going through the mind of a player as he's preparing to make the shot? He already sees the ball going through the hoop, doesn't he? And so that's what this man is. He's seeing his daughter healed. Without any doubt. This is talking about faith here, isn't it? And so the multitude go right along with him toward Jairus' house. And what's going on as they're moving along? They're bouncing Jesus all over the place. We're not even there, Steve. We're talking about how they're going here. There are texts that are telling us there's two places here. I thought I had the place here that they thronged him is what we have in our text. Just picture that. These people trying to get close to Jesus, and maybe people are trying to keep their distance from Jesus, but you got people behind them trying to get closer, and they're pushing them into Jesus. We can understand why it was necessary for him to take a break from this. This must have been exhausting to be found in a situation like this. And so Jesus being pushed through the crowds all around him, we have that in verse 24 of Mark's gospel, and also in verse 31. That's what I was looking for. 24 and 31, it's repeated. The crowd around Jesus may have played an important part of what happens next. Now, we're going to move on to the second miracle. And Jesus hasn't really done a miracle concerning Jairus' daughter yet, has he? And so this miracle has often been called the parenthetical miracle. As he's on his way to Jairus' house, there's another miracle that Jesus performs before he even gets to the destination. That's a good point. We don't even know that he's performed it yet.
No, what I'm saying, no, he doesn't even know until the woman touches his robe.
Mm-hmm.
So he has no idea of the miracle that he just happens to do.
Well,
He happens to do because he doesn't know it.
I imagine Jesus did know. And we're going to be talking about why he asks the questions he does. It's not because Jesus is not aware of what's going on or even that he knows who the woman is. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves. But he asks questions for clarification in people's minds. And I think sometimes we fail to see the wisdom of how Jesus handles people in situations. He's calling upon them to think through it, to draw their conclusions instead of just telling them. And they're there, and they can see for themselves. Yes, Brother Bergstrom.
Well, it's just like God the Father would do, asking questions. You know God knows the answer.
Yeah.
Like even when asking Job, when he's talking to Job and finally kind of giving Job the talking down, like where he would not get up. He's not asking questions for an answer. He's trying to jog your mind. Think about it.
Or as he says to Cain, where's your brother? God didn't know where Abel was. He didn't know what Cain had done.
He wanted a confession.
Yeah. He needed to hear it out of Cain's mouth, didn't he?
He wanted to change his confession to the deed.
That's right. So the woman that we're going to be introduced here, depending upon your translation and which account that you read, she is described as a woman with the discharge of blood. This obviously, from the description, was a chronic disease. Some versions say hemorrhage in verse 25. She was hemorrhaging. She has had this situation for 12 years, and nobody has been able to help her. And now she has nothing. Why doesn't she have anything? She spent it all on these physicians who had not helped her. In some ways, medical science in the first century was not at all like it is today. I mean, I'm sure they had certain types of medicines, plants and so on that a physician would use. But a lot of these diseases by these physicians were not cured by medicine. Some have said that they were exorcised by charms. Kind of reminds you of the Indian witch doctors or medicine men in this country. And they were considered doctors or physicians. Mark 5:28 is clear that her goal was to touch the clothes of Jesus, and she was able to touch the fringe of his garment. She did not want to bother him. And perhaps at first, you may not pick up why she did not want to bother him. She did not want attention drawn to herself. And we're going to find that when Jesus calls for her, she's really afraid. Why would she be afraid? We're getting a little ahead here.
She didn't want to draw attention to herself.
Why not?
Because she was probably ashamed of what was going on with her physically.
Oh, she's religiously unclean.
Yes, she was unclean. She wasn't supposed to be with the population. We'll talk about that in just a moment. All she wanted to do was she didn't even want to touch Jesus. She just wanted to touch the fringe of his garment. That's all she was asking for. But her faith told her if she could do that, she would be healed. To me, that's really amazing. I mean, wouldn't you think a woman after 12 years and having spent all of everything that you have on people who are supposed to be able to help you, would you be inclined to just meet somebody like this? It's desperation, but she sees an end to this too, just by touching the fringe of his garment, that she would be healed. It's the same type of faith that Jairus has. I don't know if we ever talk about that. I think there's a reason why these two miracles occur at the same time. And the information or the basis of their faith is exactly the same in both cases. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. We can't help but notice, as I've just said, that the cases of Jairus and this woman, their faith caused them to act, and Jesus rewarded their faith. And so let's take a moment then to analyze this faith. Yes, brother?
I was going to say, if we look at the woman who's been dealing with this issue of blood for 12 years, long before Jesus was around in his ministry, all she had to deal with were, if she wanted help and what she would believe assistance from God would be with the Pharisees.
Mm-hmm.
But now she has this opportunity with a personal, direct connection to God. And it's a very different connection than would have been through, again, the religious hierarchy of the time. This is direct. There's no intermediary. It's straight with God.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any significance in it, but I thought it's kind of interesting. The girl's 12 years old, and she's had this disease for 12 years. I don't see any significance, but except both are 12 years. But when you look at that faith, when you analyze her faith, notice it's not based on mysticism or even on her own feelings. What was it based upon? What caused her to move on her faith or to develop this faith? Where did it come from?
In fact, Jesus, other miracles in the past, possibly similar miracles.
Verse 27, when she heard about Jesus.
When she heard about Jesus. Steve, if she was isolated from population, she probably had not even seen Jesus. But she'd heard of him. That's the thing. In other words, her faith is based upon eyewitness testimony. Eyewitness testimony. She had heard of the reports of his healing, former healings of Jesus. What was it that Jairus had? I mean, pretty much the same thing, because he was confident that Jesus could help him. Listen, these accounts are recorded for us for very good reasons. Our faith that Jesus is who he claimed to be and will do what he says is based on the very same kind of evidence. And what is that evidence? Eyewitness testimony. And we read about it in Scripture. Yes, Brother Gene?
Yeah, I wonder if this was a dangerous thing for Jairus to do because of his position.
Oh, that's what we're talking. You might have not been able to hear earlier, but this was a risk for him. I mean, it's not just coming to Jesus. But he comes to Jesus, he kneels before, he worships Jesus. He puts everything on the line here. His position in the synagogue and so on. The ire of the religious establishment. But once again, he is a desperate man, isn't he?
Very.
In both instances, whether it's Jairus or with this woman, they are acting out of desperation. And they have no other place to turn but to Jesus. Perhaps we fail to realize how desperate the situation was for her. Because she had this blood condition, this disease, she was banned from the public, banned from the worship services. She could not touch anyone else. And actually, she would make them unclean. All you have to do is read Numbers 19 and verse 22. In fact, the whole chapter deals with how people become unclean. And I must admit to you, when I read through that chapter, and I spent quite a bit of time in it, some of the things that people are called upon, ashes of a heifer and all that, and being washed and going to sundown and all that type of thing, this is really strange. But you also see in here, before ever discovered by medical science today, the principle of quarantine. And the washing so that the disease would not be passed from person to person. Because you can't see the germs, can you? But they're there. Yes, Brother Baki?
I go back to Jairus for a second, because the very last statement that Jesus makes even more sense than just keeping the crowds away from him, but he's also protecting Jairus probably by telling him strictly that no one should know about this.
Yes. And that's the last thing we read in the chapter. Just think about how considerate Jesus was to people. Brother Baki bringing out that even to protect Jairus, at the end of the chapter, he tells, don't you tell people about this. And not only that, but we're going to see that there will only be, 6 people that will be present for this? Peter, James, John, Jesus, and the mother and father of the little girl. I think you're right, Brother Baki. I think he was looking out for Jairus in this case. You say, well, why wouldn't you want people to know it? Well, people already know what Jesus can do. And this is
If he tells them, he will be ostracized.
yeah, he could be ostracized. And do they really care that his daughter has been healed? They're more concerned about discrediting Jesus, aren't they?
Well, they could have brought out the synagogue too.
Sure. And so we can only imagine what this woman is going through. It must have been even difficult for her to enter the crowd, much less push through the crowd in order to get to Jesus. But when she touched the fringe of his garment, she turned from feeling bad to feeling good. Verse 29 says that immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. Luke records precisely that when she touched Jesus, her flow of blood stopped. Right there. Right there. There is no question about cause and effect when you come to this. That's in verse 44 of Luke 8. And so Luke, the physician, reports that the healing was instantaneous, not gradual, no need for her to return to Jesus next week for additional treatments which had cost her everything that she owned with the physicians of her day. She was drained, and those people weren't even able to help her. And again, we are reminded of her desperate state, which caused the disease, that was caused by this disease. Jesus asked the question, "Who touched my clothes?" Look at verse 30. It's not so much who touched me, who touched my clothes. Are you really aware of anything on your clothes? Especially if it's on your back, the back of my coat. Unless it's heavy, you might feel some weight or something like that.
What I find to be interesting, Glenn, is that she was in this throng, the multitude. And I think the multitude, they weren't paying any attention to her at all.
Yeah, their focus was on Jesus. She was a nobody as far as they're concerned. Yes, that's right. And so not only did Jesus know someone had touched him, his clothes, but we can be sure he knew who it was. So if Jesus knows who it was, why then did he ask the question?
Because he wanted the answer from
Going to get her to reveal herself.
Well,
Give her an opportunity.
yes. Actually, there are a number of possibilities here that people have offered. And these are not original by me, but I thought I'd share them with you. One is publicly prove the woman's cure so that she might return to the worship in the temple and enjoy social interaction. But even with a situation like this, where would she have to go first? To the priest and be declared clean. See? Or it could be to make sure that she knew that the power to heal was with Jesus, not his cloak. Or thirdly, to give the woman an opportunity to express her gratitude and thereby become a witness to those in the crowd of who Jesus is. Yes, Sister.
Even the disciples had, when he said, "Who touched my clothes?" Even the disciples
What are you talking about? Who you mean? Who touched you?
he just pushed her all over the place, and he wondered who touched her clothes.
See, and we're going to get into this word perceive. Perceive is not really as a result of touching. Jesus knew certain things. And it's a word that sometimes we can use as well. Yes, Sister Bergstrom?
Well, I just think it's interesting that, you would think that the other people that were following him would have also had faith in him, right? And you would think that anybody that touched him bumped into him, I can see better, I can feel better, they'd all be healed of whatever little affliction they may have had. But that's not the case. All the people that were bumping into him
Yeah.
were not healed.
Why?
She was.
That's a good point, and it needs to come out. Why wouldn't it be the case that every person who had an affliction, whatever it might be, that touched Jesus would be healed? Why wouldn't they all be healed?
because their hearts were in the right place to be healed. Maybe their hearts were
We're
hardened
seeking it,
already. And they were just trying to see who Jesus was
Yeah.
and not really believe
Yeah, these healings weren't accidents.
they were done on purpose.
These healings were a result of faith, weren't they? People deliberately come to Jesus. People deliberately touch Jesus, the hem of his garment, believing that they're going to receive a benefit from that.
But that's only because of faith. The other ones,
That's right.
the multitude was there just to see Jesus and to hear about him without really having faith in him or on him.
So Jesus announces how he knows what has happened. Look at Luke's account, Luke 8 and verse 46. And this is where some of these words get kind of important to us. But Jesus said, "Somebody touched me, for I perceive power going out from me. I perceive." The choice of words used by the Lord is interesting. The Greek language, and when I was studying the language in school, there were several different words for know, and each one had a different angle to it. The most popular one, the first one you learn, even in Greek grammar, is gnosko. And this does not refer to physical sensations. No, Jesus really had no particular sensation that power had gone from him, but he knew it. When the woman, even the woman's feeling in her body that she was healed, it's the same thing here. She perceives it. It's described by the same word, gnosko, and means that she knew it mentally, not emotionally. It actually happened to her. She didn't just feel like it had happened. In any case, the woman would be given an opportunity to testify as to what has happened to her. And so, because of time, this is a good place for us to stop, because we're going to finish this miracle on Wednesday evening, and then Jesus will make it to the house of Jairus, and that will be the second miracle. So this is a parenthetical miracle. Jesus, in the process of going to do one miracle, is interrupted to do yet another. So any questions or comments? I really appreciate your participation, your interest. It makes the class so much more interesting, doesn't it? Thank you.